Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. Within minutes of the Parkland, Florida massacre, our media identified a villain. It wasn't the 19-year-old who actually pulled the trigger. CNN actually published a piece last night scolding the president for calling him crazy. That was a slur, according to them. No, the real killer, the media told us, was the NRA, along with millions of law-abiding gun owners. Blood was on their hands. Well, a few days later, now that we have some facts, it turns out it's not so simple. It turns out that government at all levels played a role in allowing this massacre to happen. In fact, a much larger role than we knew or ever would have guessed. The details are shocking. Here's part of what we've learned so far. The Broward County Sheriff's Office received at least 23 calls related to Nicholas Cruz and his family. In 2016, a deputy was told directly that Cruz was threatening to shoot up his school, the one he shot up, and had taken photographs of himself with firearms. That information was forwarded to Deputy Scott Peterson. That name sounds familiar. That is the exact security guard at Stoneman Douglas High School who hid outside during the shooting and refused to go inside as 17 people were murdered. Apparently doing nothing was a habit of Peterson's. President Trump weighed in on him today on his way to CPAC. Watch.
When it came time to get in there and do something, he didn't have the courage or something happened. But he certainly did a poor job. There's no question about that. He was there for 5 minutes. For 5 minutes. That was during the entire shooting. He heard it right at the beginning. So he certainly did a poor job. But that's a case where somebody was outside, they're trained, they didn't react properly under pressure, or they were cowards.
Scott Peterson may not have been the only coward on the scene. Brand new reports tonight suggest that 3 other Broward County deputies arrived at the school during the massacre but did not enter or attempt to pursue Cruz. Instead, they hid outside behind their vehicles until Coral Springs police officers arrived and found them. Inaction appears to be a defining quality in the Broward County Sheriff's Office. Last November, Broward County was warned that Cruz was a school shooter in the making and was collecting weapons with which to do it. They didn't even write a report on the tip, and instead they told the tipster to report Cruz to the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office. That's how local police responded, or didn't respond. The state wasn't much better. Later in 2016, despite evidence of suicidal behavior by Cruz and his expressed desire to buy a firearm, the Florida Department of Children and Families decided that somehow he was not a threat to himself or others. If they decided otherwise, Cruz would have been involuntarily committed and would have been barred from buying a gun. So in case you're wondering, how was this guy able to buy a gun? That's how. And then there's the FBI, the feds. In September 2017, the FBI was warned that a YouTube user named Nicholas Cruz, spelled correctly, had written this, quote, "I'm going to be a professional school shooter." He wrote that online. The FBI now says that was not enough information to identify who made that remark, and they were unable to investigate, despite the fact that Cruz gave his real name spelled in the unusual way that it is spelled. In January 2018, the FBI was warned again that Cruz was planning to shoot up a school and were given specific information about his erratic behavior, his gun collecting, his expressed desire to kill people. He did not hide that. The tipster warned that Cruz was, quote, going to explode, and worried it was just a matter of time before he, quote, was in a school and shooting the place up. The caller also told the FBI that she made the call because she wanted a, quote, clear conscience if he takes off and just starts shooting places up. In response, the FBI did nothing. They didn't even bother to forward that tip to their Miami field office, so it died. The school system failed as well, and badly. In 2013, school officials decided to radically cut down on in-school arrests, claiming that school discipline was racially biased. The school simply stopped referring students to police for assault and drug use and numerous other crimes, actual crimes. Total arrests declined from more than 1,000 a year to fewer than 400. So in spite of getting in trouble with school authorities repeatedly, Cruz was never arrested, he was never charged, never convicted, never stopped from buying a gun. The schools failed, the local police failed, the Florida state bureaucracy failed, the officer on duty failed, the FBI failed. The government's first duty is protecting its citizens. They failed. Ultimately, citizens have to defend themselves. The message could not be clearer, and yet the same government officials who failed to protect us are saying we don't have a right to protect ourselves. Michael Graham is a Boston Herald columnist and host of Michael in the Morning podcast at Ricochet.com, and he joins us tonight to assess this cascade of failures and the self-righteousness that have followed. This seems like, to me, Michael, the biggest case of deflection on record. The government officials, rather than stopping and saying, you know what, we screwed up, and we're going to find out why, are saying, America, it's your fault.
You know, when you listen to you recounting all those events, obviously the culprit, Tucker, is the NRA. If only the NRA were destroyed, then we would solve all these problems. I love this argument that we are not competent enough to own guns to protect ourselves because we're too stupid, we'll shoot our eye out, whatever, so we have to rely on government. So we say, okay, how about the government? Well, actually, they're out in the parking lot hiding, waiting till the shooting's over. So can I have a gun then? Oh, no, that just proves that guns don't work. It's a heads I win, tails you lose argument from people who want to restrict gun rights.
It really, something's going on here, though, because I still have respect for and affection for law enforcement. I know a million of them, great people, protect us here at Fox, grateful to them. But here you have, apparently, according to reports tonight, 4 separate armed cops or deputies, sheriff's deputies, refusing to go in. You can't tell me that all 4 of them were just cowards. I mean, there must be, is there some policy in place? If you took a cross-section of Americans, just pick 4, at least one of them would have gone in. None of these guys did. What is that about?
That's a very good point, because a normal person could not stand there with a gun and listen to kids get killed without running in the door.
Right.
I wrote a piece for the Federalist today going back and looking at other incidents where the cops stayed outside. People forget the Orlando massacre, which was the worst shooting in modern America until Las Vegas. The cop actually had a gun exchange with the killer. The killer goes in, the cop stays outside. Then he waits, and then SWAT shows up, and they stand outside 3 hours while murdering is going on inside. In Newtown, according to the Judicial Review afterwards, a cop stood outside for 4 or 5 minutes listening to the gunfire and did not go in the building. And so there are 2 branches here. One is cowardice. I think the president is right to make that point. But the other is training that departments still haven't figured out how they're going to deal with these issues. Columbine was supposed to be the turning point. We know people waited outside at Columbine because we'd never seen a Columbine. It's kind of like 9/11. You can't blame people for not understanding 9/11. We'd never seen it. Well, this is the post-9/11, post-Columbine moment. Just as people on an airplane will never sit and wait, for the hijackers to take the plane anywhere, police should not sit and wait for people to die inside the building. And the argument I got today, and I heard from a lot of police officers today, is, you don't understand, Michael, if we go in, there'll be danger. Wait, there's a guy with a gun in there. They're dead people. I think the danger part's already covered. And then the second, and this is truly disturbing, and I'm with you. My uncle is retired LAPD. He was honored for heroism twice. His brother was a deputy. I have law enforcement in my family. The vast majority want to do the right thing.
Yes.
But the number of police officers who have told me point blank, my number 1 job is to go home safe at night to my family. And they point to a Supreme Court case that says that police do not have a duty to protect you. And I think to myself, if that's really how you view the world, if you're really, your number 1 job is to go home safe at night, then you need to find a mall that needs a security guard and do that for a living. The reason we honor cops is that cops do that amazing thing.
Exactly.
They see danger, and they see an innocent person and themselves, and they say, I'm going to choose to get between the innocent person and the bad guy. That's why we honor cops. We don't honor cops because they have the best policy and they sit outside a car waiting for the SWAT team.
If they don't want to protect us, that's fine, but don't prevent us from protecting ourselves. I mean, let's just be honest about what we're dealing with.
Exactly.
Michael, thank you for that. That was really insightful.
Thank you.
Last night, we had Florida Democratic State Senator Gary Farmer on to discuss his support of gun control measures that he has sponsored in the state. Farmer was dishonest throughout the interview. We're not using that term lightly. Gary Farmer is trying to strip you of a basic constitutional right, so we think it's important to correct the record and let you know that he was not telling the truth through parts of that interview. And we have some examples. Just before the show started, news broke that a government security guard at Douglas High in Parkland hid outside the building as Nicholas Cruz murdered 17 inside. We just told you about that. The sheriff had just had a press conference saying so right before our show last night. Here's part.
Went in, addressed the killer, killed the killer.
So we asked Farmer about this right at the top of the segment. It made the obvious point. They're admitting that they didn't protect the kids. Shouldn't they be able to protect themselves? Farmer said, it's breaking news. I can't really respond to that. Yet as the interview progressed, he began to make up his own facts about it. Watch.
The fact of the matter is most of the carnage occurred before he ever had an opportunity to be there to stop it.
Well, that's not true. He made that up and then started shouting, so it was hard to correct that. The shooting, by the way, lasted 6 minutes, and Peterson waited outside the building for 4 minutes. But Farmer kept lying, including this. In this bill, owners of the rifles, including many hunting rifles that you designate weapons of war and assault rifles, people who own them now...
Not true, but keep going. Misinformation number 1.
Is true.
Keep going.
Would have to register those rifles with the government. Am I misreading that?
No, that's a different bill. That's a different bill, Tucker.
So we had just read the bill before last night's show and thought that was right. We looked it up again today, and it was right. That bill does require you to register your firearms, not because you've done something wrong, but just because you have them. Farmer says this was his bill, so of course he must have known that, and yet he lied about it, and that's useful to know going forward, and we'll hope you'll remember it. Johnny Joey Jones is a retired staff sergeant who was wounded in Afghanistan, and he joins us tonight. Johnny, thanks for coming up.
Good evening, Tucker.
Good evening. So I think people are so horrified by what happened at Parkland, going back 20 years to Columbine, even before that, that they're open to solutions, and I think a lot of people are open to gun control because it sounds like it might work. You've thought a lot about this. You've been around guns a lot of your life. Would it work?
Well, listen, in the Marine Corps, I learned the war game every move, to look at my end goal and work my way backwards. And that's what I've done for the last week. I've looked at every policy suggested and war gamed it to the end. And it all comes back to the same end, in my opinion. We make a decision. Do we ban all guns or a certain type of gun, which would include confiscation and registry and things that a lot of people, even those in favor of gun control, aren't in favor of? Or do we do more defensive posture? Do we secure our schools, make sure the background checks work, and go down this path that we're already on in a lot of ways, and that we have to go down either way? And so my opinion and what I'm saying through the research and the wargaming that I see and the rhetoric trying to weed through it all is that the first thing we need to do is make sure the background checks we already do work. Make sure the infrastructure and the resources behind our law enforcement, from local to federal, is actually being used. President Bush's legacy is the Department of Homeland Security, among everything else. In a quick amount of time, we were able to take local law enforcement stations that couldn't talk to each other on the radio or even talk to the fire stations and coordinate their communication and their intelligence sharing all the way up to the FBI and further. And if we can't do the same amount of diligence and the same amount of work, if that's not worth our time, if a sweeping piece of legislation, simply because it makes us feel better, is the answer that we go to now, then we're suffering from the instant gratification that's taken a hold of millennials and everyone else in this country.
Yeah, and kind of missing the point, which is why is our society producing people like Nicholas Cruz in the first place? That might be worth thinking about. But so I wonder if, as you point out, there are already a lot of laws. We have far more restrictive gun laws than we did when I was born, for example, and we have more shootings. Maybe we're not enforcing them correctly. If the government is failing to enforce the laws on the books, why does nobody ever hold the government accountable for that?
Well, right now it's political rhetoric. Right now it's not about what makes our schools safer. I'm sure a lot of people spewing rhetoric feel that way. And let me tell you, I've got a house full of guns. None of them are ever going to kill anyone that doesn't need to die because they're trying to hurt my family. But I'm okay with the idea of bringing in new laws. But when you war game these out, for example, if you ban ARs, well, you're going to have to grandfather in the ones that are here or have a confiscation program. That won't go over well. Timothy McVeigh killed 168 people in a federal government building with a bomb made from fertilizer and diesel fuel because he didn't agree with how the federal government was handling a policy. Yeah. Crazy exists in all subgroups. If you go after and confiscate guns, crazy is going to come out again, and it's going to come out just as bad. So don't start catalysts for people to go out and do other things that are evil and tormented. So I can tell you, if you try to ban these guns, if you don't go that path, you'll do what's called the National Firearms Act. So basically what you'll do is you'll put these guns in a category similar with suppressors and fully auto. And then they become infinitely expensive, and you've created a system where only rich people can own these types of guns, which is unconstitutional in and of itself.
I don't think that would bother Michael Bloomberg surrounded by armed bodyguards, but you make a good point. Johnny, thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on.
On last night's show, we interviewed a survivor of the Parkland shooting called Colton Hobb. Hobb was invited to the so-called town hall on gun control that CNN held this week, but he withdrew from that when he says CNN altered one of his questions. In our interview last night, Colton unequivocally described CNN as ideological and dishonest. So almost immediately after the show, CNN responded by claiming that Colton Hobb is lying, even altering evidence. Tonight, CNN executives leaked unauthorized and authorized release of what they claim are Colton's personal emails. They're trying to claim that he or his family altered evidence of his exchange with a CNN producer. All of this surprised us because, as you'll remember, it was just a few days ago that CNN was declaring that anyone who questioned the integrity of Parkland survivors, and Colton Hobb is one of them, is a monster guilty of the most severe kind of moral crime. And yet CNN is doing the very same thing right now, questioning the integrity of a survivor because it suits them. So there's some irony there. But there is also the larger and we think more important question of what's actually true. This is journalism. We don't know what's actually true. So we're going to do our best to find out, and we're going to tell you if we do. Well, the press spent a year clamoring for the truth about collusion with Russia. Why do they seem to have abandoned the story or even denied it ever existed? Interesting. That's next. Well, the American media were integral to creating the narrative that the Trump campaign colluded with Vladimir Putin to hack the election. No evidence of that has come out yet. And now those same outlets are pretending the whole thing never happened. They never claim that. But that doesn't mean they've grown uninterested in the Mueller investigation. In fact, they treat that investigation's efforts as sacred, even though Mueller's team of lawyers includes 13 Democrats, 3 independents, and no Republicans, unless you include Mueller himself. Lee Smith is a senior fellow at the Hudson Institute and a media columnist for Tablet Magazine. He joins us tonight. So, Lee, the part, whatever you think of the Russia investigation, or whatever you anticipate we're going to learn from it, you can't deny that the press alleged, in effect, collusion for months.
Yes.
It's a little much to pretend they didn't, right?
This was going on well before the election, and went on even well before the stories that we know were attributed to have, or believed to have come from the Steele dossier.
Right.
That was the Yahoo News piece and then the Mother Jones piece. This started in July. If you look, there is a campaign, an information operation. The press is already going on, prestige publications and the American press, who are going after different figures in the Trump campaign, namely Carter Page. The whole thing is ridiculous. And if you look at the way they're attacking Carter Page, it's like, no one knows who Carter Page is at this point. It's like they're talking about Brzezinski or Kissinger or something like that.
But so if I were covering the auto industry and I were repeating uncritically every talking point GM sent me,
Right.
that would not make me a journalist. That would make me basically an employee of GM.
Right.
It seems like reporters are doing that with the intel community and with the Mueller investigation.
Yes, it's actually shameful, the idea that the American press is working, has been working for a while with the intelligence community, taking leaks from them. Many of these leaks, of course, are illegal, like with the leak of Michael Flynn. Exactly, the way that they're working in an information operation along with the intelligence community. Yeah, it's a horrible thing to have happened to the press. And the press did it to themselves.
Well, but you can hurt yourself as a journalist if you're not relentlessly skeptical. And I always thought, even though journalists have always been liberal, I get it, I've done it my whole life.
Absolutely.
But skepticism was a thing that tied all journalists together. Whatever happened to that?
I think a lot of different things have happened. It's not just about the press leaning toward the left, which is usually, again, that's the way the press has always been.
For sure.
Something very different happened here. And I do believe that there will be a price to pay. I do believe that different people, once the Russiagate narrative starts to fade away more and more, once the dossier nonsense has gone through, I believe that people will look back and they will say, what happened here? What did the press do? We enjoyed it. It was like a bunch of chocolates. We enjoyed it. We got a rush from it. But now we don't believe that we can trust them anymore. I think that's going to be the upshot of this.
I know you're not here to talk politics, but since you live in Washington,
Sure,
I just very quickly can't resist.
Right.
Can you run a midterm election on Russian collusion? Like, can the Democrats win on this story? I know whole cable shows are devoted to this.
I don't see how. What are they going to do? They're going to run against Vladimir Putin? No, I think it's much more likely the Republicans are going to wind up running against people like Adam Schiff. They're going to wind up running against people. They're going to wind up running against people, senior Democratic figures who may have played a very destructive role in the 2016 elections. And I think if we look at the different investigations on the Hill, the Senate Judiciary Committee and the House Intelligence Committee, it looks like there are senior Democrats who have done some very bad things. I think it doesn't look great for them heading into 2016.
Yeah, I think they've heard. If I were a Democrat who wanted to talk about economics or a real issue, I'd be very mad at Adam Schiff. Lee, thank you. That was really interesting.
Thanks for having me, Tucker. Thanks for your time.
Well, a huge percentage of what you hear on TV these days centers on the perils of Russia. Russia attacked our democracy. Russia corrupted our election. Putin has declared war. Russia is our greatest threat. That's what the Democratic Party and their PR department in the American media have been telling us for more than a year. No one's defending Russia, but is this true? Let's play a game, and you can decide. We'll describe actions by a hostile foreign power, and you guess whether it's Russia or China. Get a pen. Ready? First, the FBI director said this country uses students and professors at American universities as spies. This problem is so widespread that almost every FBI field office is dealing with it. Russia? Nope. China. China has 350,000 students in the U.S., some of whom apparently are intelligence agents. Next question. This country reportedly hacked the Office of Personnel Management, giving it access to millions of federal personnel records, which allows its spy agency to locate espionage targets. This country also hacked the FDIC and a number of other government agencies and departments. Russia? No, China. A company from this country has effectively taken over an entire U.S. territory. Bloomberg reported last week how a massive state-sponsored gambling operation now essentially runs the island of Saipan, which used to be ours. Russia? Nope. China once again. Question 4. This country will soon overtake the U.S. as the world's largest economy, if it has not already. Russia? Please, it's hilarious. Russia's third world compared to, yes, China. This country has killed tens of thousands of Americans by manufacturing and exporting fentanyl, the deadliest narcotic known to man. Russia may have maintained fake Twitter accounts, but actually China did that. Finally, this country demands that American companies censor their products, movies, media, websites, in order not to offend the corrupt oligarchy that runs their police state. Amazingly, American companies obediently comply with these orders because they're afraid not to. Is it Russia they're kowtowing to, that mean old Putin? Of course not. It's China. So tell us, which country strikes you as a bigger threat to America? Ying Ma is the author of Chinese Girl in the Ghetto, former deputy director of the Committee for American Sovereignty, a pro-Trump super PAC, and she joins us tonight. Ying, thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me.
So look, I mean, there are a couple levels. One, I think China is a threat to the United States. The rise of China is a threat to our place in the world. But compared to Russia, is there really a comparison?
Well, you know, let's recall that a few years ago it was Senator John McCain who said that Russia really is just a gas station masquerading as a country.
Yes.
So, you know, you don't need to take that literally, but I think any sane person would look at China's economy, look at the trajectory of their rise, and understand that China actually poses a much more serious long-term strategic threat to America's place in the world. But we don't even have to look at that on such a broad scale. I think we just need to look back 20 years. The last time we had a serious foreign influence campaign scandal in this country was during the Clinton era, when, you know, the Democratic National Committee was forced to give back nearly $3 million of foreign money, and we know that
is that Russian money?
And we know that, you know, during that scandal there was actually a lot of Chinese money involved,
yes.
Money from the communist government or people affiliated with the Chinese government, and there was money from elsewhere in Asia too. But I mean, that was actually real money that had to be given back. Thus far, we haven't seen anything like that in the current Russia investigation.
So is it possible that if you want to know who has power, you just ask who does nobody criticize? Everyone can criticize Russia. There are no repercussions. Has a single person in Hollywood or in finance ever criticized China? Doesn't that kind of tell you how beholden we are to China, what a threat they actually are, that nobody ever says anything?
Well, I mean, I think some people have criticized China when it was popular to do so. I mean, let's remember 7 Years in Tibet, done by Brad Pitt. It was popular back then to criticize.
Could that get made today?
I don't know. I mean, you know, Hollywood hasn't come and asked me for my opinion on the
The
so I have no idea.
Richard Gere can't even get a movie role
right?
because China doesn't like him.
Well, yeah, there you go. But what we do know is that a lot of these Hollywood people like to do things that are popular. And these days it is popular to criticize Donald Trump. It is popular to question the legitimacy of his electoral victory. A lot of the people who are obsessed with the Russia investigation, people from the fake news media, what they really want to do is essentially to sort of bring out anything that makes the current president look bad.
I mean, look, I think it's okay to criticize the president. I've criticized many presidents
Sure.
and really meant it. But if you care about the country, you have to think soberly about what threats it faces.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if you're telling the public that Russia is the biggest threat America faces, you're either lying or stupid.
Well, or you could be both, right?
Yeah.
And you know, what we do know is that
Yes, you could
what we
be
do
both.
know is that while we've been obsessing over this Russia investigation, we've actually ignored some really weighty issues, not just China, but China being one of the certainly
right.
one of the most weighty issues among them. So
No, it's a really good point. There's a huge cost. As Lee Smith was just saying, there's a big cost to this stuff. Thank you
Thank
for
you
that.
so much.
Good to see you. Purdue University says students should avoid using the word man ever. Strike it from your lexicon. We'll talk to someone. Okay, we'll admit. It's Kathy Aru, and she joins us next. Don't miss that. Canadian Prime Minister and relentless apology machine Justin Trudeau is visiting India right now. And sadly for him, it's not going well. Trudeau's embarrassed his country and annoyed many Indians by dressing up in ludicrous Indian national garb, ludicrous on him, and nearly meeting a violent Sikh extremist for dinner. Recently, though, Trudeau also was mansplaining to Canadians that they should not use the word mankind, and a U.S. school agrees. A writing guide at Purdue University, accredited school, apparently, tells students to avoid words like mailman and mankind in order to have, quote, non-sexist, non-biased writing. Kathy Aru is founder and publisher of Catalina Magazine, and we think she agrees, and she joins us tonight. Kathy, it's great to see you.
Hi, good to see you.
I got to say, there's kind of a basic irony here. I mean, you're lecturing us about sexism while you're sitting right now in Manhattan.
Manhattan. We need to rename the city then. The Big Apple. The Big Apple would be less offensive. So I feel that I'm sitting in the Big Apple, not Manhattan.
Okay, but why stop there? Why should the post office deliver mail?
I know. Well, it's spelled M-A-I-L, so that's okay. If it's M-A-L-E, then there's a problem.
Homonyms count, and this applies to email too, because it's not about spelling, it's about being gender inclusive.
Right.
And mail is offensive. We just learned that.
So. Well, no, I don't think they're including that, but they are saying that society has changed and times are changing, and we don't want to be offensive in our language. And they're trying to be non-sexist and non-biased, and that means trying to take the word man out. So instead of man-made, it would be synthetic. So instead of mailman, it would be mail carrier. So there's many ways to go around it. Instead of humanity, you should say people.
But mail carrier still has mail in it. So you haven't, it's kind of a fake. Oh, but that's a Dodge.
So package carrier.
Well,
we can come up with so many other terms that are less offensive. Yeah.
You might still offend dyslexics. You can change a vowel, but it sounds the same. It has that dreaded word that sends people shrieking for their safe spaces, mail.
Well, they're saying man. Man is the word that they're trying to avoid. They're saying that the word man is associated with adult men as opposed to just humanity or humans. So they're trying to avoid the word man. So if we can eliminate that word, then things would be much better and people would be less offended.
Well, what if you lived in Manchester, Vermont?
Well, they might have to change the name of the city if people agree with Purdue University. And Purdue University found that things need to be updated, and they updated their writing guide to take out these words that apparently are offending certain groups of people.
Okay, so just to make sure I understand the rule, if something offends somebody, even if you've never met that person personally, you have to change it. So doesn't that mean that a small group of super unhappy people get to control what the rest of us say and think?
Well, perhaps they're ahead of their time. Maybe this is something that is offending a small group, but the group's going to get larger, and times are changing, and our language is dynamic. Webster keeps adding new words in the dictionary, so our language needs to change. And a term that used to be non-offensive, like man-made and male-man, now needs to be changed.
Well, I get that. I guess the question for me is who gets to decide what changes and what doesn't? So, for example, I think I've now decided that the most offensive word in the language is college professor.
Oh.
Okay? Because to me that connotes dumbness and misuse of power and tenure, right? And mediocrity. So maybe I'd like to say no one can use that word ever again in my presence because it offends me. Would that fly? Could I do that? Could I pull that off?
Well, if you have a writing guide, perhaps, and you put that out there and people agree with you, then yeah, maybe that would fly. But Purdue University did find a group that agreed with them, and the university backed them up, and there you have it. They have a writing guide that now is going to teach us how to not offend.
But do you think they have the guts? I mean, it's one thing to bully the little rich kids who go to your school, because, like, what do they know? But do you think they have the guts?
This is the heart of America.
Yeah, no, of course. But if you're paying, like, 60 grand or whatever it is for, like, the fake diploma you get, you know, and you're not working, obviously you have privilege by definition, no matter who's paying for it. But but it's easy to boss them around. Do you think they would have the guts to go to Goldman Sachs in New York and say, change your name now or else?
They probably wouldn't shop there. They probably wouldn't shop there because
what if they were shopping at Goldman Sachs? They might come up because it's a bank.
Because the name man is adult male, and yeah, we need to change it. Like woman, I mean, has the word man in there, so just call us a person.
So gold person sacks, would that be better?
I think so. I'm less offended, yes.
And by the way, what if you just, since the rule is if you spell it, and I'll stop with this because I know this is angels on the head of a pin at this point, but if you spelled man differently, like M-A-A, so it was male man, but M-A-A-N.
No, the profession, we know that the professions usually were male-dominated, and they've changed. So, no, saying male man and spelling it differently, that doesn't apply. We're trying to say this profession now applies for men and women or persons, all people. No
Wait,
man
but isn't
needed.
there a man?
No man
hold on,
needed.
isn't there a man in the word woman?
Call me a person. I'd be less offended. No need for woman.
Okay.
Yeah.
In the end, the revolution always eats itself, as we often point out. Kathy, thank you for that guided tour of the linear regions. Appreciate it.
No problem.
The left loves the great outdoors, so why do they want so much of the outdoors to be bulldozed to build skyscraper-sized windmills that make foreigners millions while destroying rural America? Good question. We'll answer it next. Wind farms are an icon of the environmental movement, but are they good for the environment? Could erecting huge turbines across the natural landscape actually be bad? Chris O'Neill is an environmentalist, but he's got profound concerns about the effect of wind farms on the natural world, and particularly in rural areas. He represents the group Friends of Maine Mountains, and he joins us tonight. Chris, thanks for coming on.
It's good to be here, Tucker.
Thank you. So I think most people who love the outdoors are in favor of sustainable energy, and wind farms seem like a really clean form of it. Why should people who love the outdoors be concerned about wind farms?
Well, what people usually start out seeing is a big, majestic piece of kinetic energy that's as big as a 747. And they say, wow, that's majestic.
Yes.
That's wonderful. We're saving the planet. But once they put some numbers behind what they see and start to quantify the impacts and the benefits, they tend to take a different view, and these majestic turbines become a whole lot less tolerable to look at.
And they have environmental effects, I mean, some of which we don't fully understand, but we know they kill a lot of birds. But they also enrich a number of big companies, not all of them based here, that take advantage of our, in effect, subsidies to get rich. Who's making the money from these things?
Well, they're largely hedge fund investors and institutional investors, many of whom are offshore and overseas. And they're people who tend to speculate. I mean, God love Berkshire Hathaway. Warren Buffett said in 2014, he said, these wind farms, and no insult to farmers, these wind farms don't make any sense at all. The only reason we do them is for the production tax credit, which is a federal subsidy.
Yeah, so the rest of us are paying for Warren Buffett to get even richer. So I guess one of the concerns I have about these, and again, I like the idea, I think most people do like the idea, but as these companies come into rural areas that are struggling, where the industry has died, and they pay off the town governments, and in exchange, people get one of these in their backyard. And do those people have any recourse? Do they have a say in this at all?
It varies state to state, Tucker, and Maine, where I live, has set up a law now for 10 years that makes it almost impossible for citizens or citizen groups to stand in the way of a permit for one of these wind applications. And they can be very big. The footprint for a typical wind energy project tends to be anywhere from 6 to 20 miles across, and they go across some ridge lines that Maine has for centuries valued a lot.
Right. So Warren Buffett can get richer. You get one of these in your backyard, killing all the birds, for a square mile, driving you crazy with the noise, and you can't do anything about it.
Well, he can do very little. And again, the state of Maine started out 10 years ago with stars in its eyes, said, we need to get our boys home from Iraq, we need to get off of oil, we need to save the planet. And what turned out to be the fact of the matter was that wind energy produces electricity, and we don't use oil for electricity. Anything we do with wind energy here in America has nothing to do with our conflagrations in the Middle East.
Right.
And the amount that we can move the needle on CO2 using wind energy is de minimis. If CO2 is a problem, and I don't like to wade into the rabbit hole of gun rights, reproductive rights, or climate change, but if CO2 is a problem, or if climate change is a problem, wind energy does nothing to solve it.
Right, exactly. And solar is actually kind of promising, but the tax code encourages hedge funds to get rich while they wreck your yard, and it's infuriating. Thank you for standing up for that. I appreciate it. Planned Parenthood says it's launching a nationwide program to promote abortion, because that'll make the country happier. What's their plan? That's next. Planned Parenthood wants America to start having more abortions as soon as possible, because that's liberation. More abortions, the better. This week, the country's largest abortion company announced a nationwide offensive that aims to make abortion easier to get all over the country. In the state of Missouri, they want a 72-hour waiting period repealed, in case you want one right now. In Maine, they want to allow nurse practitioners to give abortion pills. And those are just two of more than a dozen laws Planned Parenthood is pushing, all of which help its business model. Lila Rose is the founder and president of Live Action, a pro-life activist group, and she joins us tonight. Lila, thanks for coming on. So what's the idea that ties, I know there's a bunch of different initiatives across the country, but the idea is that more abortion equals more happiness? Is that if you could kind of sum up their position, is it that?
Yes, exactly, Tucker. It's that more abortion is somehow better for women, and they're claiming this word abortion access, just like that term pro-choice. It's really abortion pressure. It's really the only choice of abortion. Planned Parenthood is not focused on expanding access to prenatal support, pregnancy resources, parenting support, adoption referral or adoption support. Planned Parenthood is focused on abortion through all 9 months, for any reason, taxpayer funded, for any woman anywhere. And that really reveals how out of touch they are with most women and most Americans.
But that's not just your opinion as a professional pro-lifer. I mean, there's a lot of polling on this. Most people don't agree with that, actually. They're not on your side necessarily, but they're definitely not with Planned Parenthood. So that's changed, though, because 20 years ago, the abortion people basically had to say, you know, we're not for it, but if you really need it, we want to make sure it's there. Now they're saying, like, yeah, more abortion's good. That's a change, isn't it?
It's a big change. And look, like you just said, Tucker, two-thirds of Americans, over two-thirds of Americans, according to Gallup polling, want restrictions on abortions. And some of them want restrictions in the second, the third trimester. They want waiting periods. They want different forms of ensuring that women have other options. So this is really showing that Planned Parenthood is not in touch with where the country is. It's also very troubling to see how this plays out. So, for example, in Ohio, right now Planned Parenthood is challenging a law that would protect Down syndrome babies from being particularly targeted in the womb for abortion. And they're suing the health department in Ohio because they want to be able to abort because of Down syndrome or other prenatal diagnoses. What this is really saying is we don't value disabled children in the womb. But the rest of the country differs on that. Our country increasingly values disabled children. I mean, the new Gerber baby, little Lucas Warren, was a Down syndrome baby and was named Gerber Baby 2018. So it just goes to show Planned Parenthood is not in touch with what people, they're desperate. They know their taxpayer funding is at stake. They get $500 million a year. They know that the president and that both the House and many in the Senate have said they would stop funding Planned Parenthood. So they know that the Department of Justice has been investigating them for the selling of baby body parts, and the FBI has been doing that as well. So they're very concerned, and they're trying to, this is ultimately a feeble attempt to push back, to try to say that, put their stake in the ground. But again, I think that it's not going to go over well, and I think that this is going to raise up more people to oppose them than support them. So just really quick, Planned Parenthood, the nation's biggest abortion provider, which supports sex-selective abortions and anything else you can imagine, gets about $500 million a year in our money. And a lot of Republicans support that. How much money do you get in federal? Do you get $500 million in federal subsidies a year? No, we don't receive any. Live Action's a nonprofit. We receive no federal funding. Oh, but they get $500 million, but you get none, and then Republicans like Lisa Murkowski make that possible. Just wanted to be clear on that. Lila, thank you for joining us tonight. I appreciate it. Thanks, Tucker. Thanks. We'll be back with an announcement you will not want to miss, so don't.